come to order, please. This is a special town council meeting of the Garrett Park Town Council. We will begin with approval of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda as circulated?
I'll make that.
Lisa
Yes.
moves and
I'll make them.
Phil seconds.
Yeah.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We approve the agenda, and the first item for action is consideration of whether we wish to apply for federal funding for the town hall renovation project for fiscal year 26, federal fiscal year. We've received a background memorandum from town manager, but Barbara, if you would wish to summarize that or add to it as necessary.
Sure. So I think as everyone's aware, in March of last year, so just about a year ago, we filed an application for congressionally directed spending funding with the offices of Senator Cardin and Senator Van Hollen. They did elect to advance our application to the Senate Appropriations Committee, which after some back and forth did recommend approval of our application for funding in the federal fiscal year 2025 Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies bill. We requested $500,000, which was the maximum that is allowable under the National Park Service Save America's Treasures authorization. I think everyone's well aware that there was a president recently signed into law a continuing budget resolution. That measure eliminates all earmarked projects from both the fiscal 2024 appropriations and omitted the $15.9 billion that was designated for earmarked projects that would have been included in the fiscal 2025 House and Senate appropriation bills. We were advised by Senator Van Hollen's office that at the time that our application was still pending, that we should not apply for FY 2026 funding for the project. When the continuing budget resolution was signed into law, I got an email from Senator Van Hollen, senior policy analyst, who's been our point of contact, basically letting us know that they would reopen their application portal for those who found themselves in the same situation as Garrett Park. So the deadline to decide whether or not we reapply is essentially midnight on Sunday, March 30th. I think one of the considerations may be just timing. As I was just mentioning to the mayor, I did contact Senator Van Hollen's office this morning just to sort of get a sense of, if we did throw our hat back in the ring, what is really the realistic timeline that we might be able to actually tap funding, because that certainly is a consideration you all might want to consider.
And is there any additional information we'd have to update? Is there a lot of time and effort in reapplying?
Basically, we have to do the application. They said we were perfectly fine to basically cut and paste from the application we did before, which obviously I have a copy of. I did ask about, were we required to get new letters of support? And she said, no, we could just submit the ones we had last year, because that would involve reaching out to the state delegation at sort of a difficult time, as well as Councilmember Kate Stewart also provided a letter.
So why did they recommend against reapplying?
Because at the time that they opened their application portal for FY 2026 funding, I think the expectation was that Congress would allow earmark funding to be in the budget.
Oh, right.
And they didn't want to have duplicate funding for essentially the same project.
Oh, I see.
And then after the portal closed is when everything sort of.
So now they recommend that we apply.
They're basically giving us the opportunity to do that, because the guidance had specifically been not to apply for the same project. So basically what Senator Van Hollen's office basically indicated, I specifically asked this morning about the National Park Service application, which they had brought to my attention before, that we would need to fill out. That's apparently tied to putting together a grant agreement. So assuming, and I think anyone who can predict what's going to happen in Congress, but if Congress were to pass the final FY 26 appropriations bill in December of 2025, she indicated that it would probably take about 2 to 3 months to put together the grant agreement with the National Park Service. And her guess is that the earliest we would have access to the funds would be spring 2026. Also, part of this is because I'm putting together our capital grants award package that I have to submit through the state. Basically, I had Greg Wiedemann sort of outline what he thought the schedule would be. And he basically said that, and I'll preface this by saying, this time frame that he had given me, because I have to put it in our capital award grant package for the state. This timeline assumes prompt acceptance of the design, development, design and estimate, and also assumes that MHT will not require a public hearing process and county HPC and MHT grant approval. This timeline basically would have us being in permitting and bidding in roughly the spring 2026 timeframe. And Greg, like you say, there's a lot of disclaimers to this timeline. And that probably on a more aggressive schedule that we would be awarding a contract in July of 2026. So those are sort of the two relevant timeframes as when we think we would actually be bidding out the project potentially and when any funding from the federal government might be available. And there's a lot of ifs in all this information, unfortunately.
However, we wouldn't need the cash until sometime after notice, after the project's been bid and so forth, which is gonna drag on into the fall.
I mean, we're fortunate that you all have set aside a lot of funding,
Right.
over the years. And so there is sufficient funding, obviously, for this level of design that you've already contracted for and the next stage of design.
But not to accept a bid for the construction of the project.
Right,
We
and I
wouldn't
think
have the money at that time.
it depends what the estimates come in at. I mean, as you all
Right.
recall, the design development phase, you're going to get an updated estimate based on 50% construction drawings. So there's just a lot of factors for you all to consider.
But it seems that we should rephrase the question, which is why wouldn't we apply? I mean, it seems like we're not likely to get it. It seems that like things are tightening and only going to get worse at the federal level. Nonetheless, if it's just a cut and paste job, I mean, why not? Why wouldn't we? I mean, what do we lose? I mean, how long will it take? It sounds like an hour or two.
Yeah, that seems like the right question to me. What is the downside?
I know Mayor Keller had expressed some concern in my conversation with him, and that's.
Well, I think I first expressed my views on the federal
Yeah.
grant even before the political
Yes.
conventions last year, much less the election or inauguration day. And even at that time, it was not a slam dunk that we would get this. I think it's even less so now. So there's a sort of a threshold question of whether we want to expend staff time and energy, even if it's a relatively small amount. But the larger question is, do we want to inject yet more delay into this? We can't finalize plans until we know whether we have that last $500,000 would be the argument for not proceeding.
But that's true no matter what we do.
No, it isn't. If we haven't applied, then we have to find the money ourselves.
Right, but we don't have that.
It holds
money.
our feet to the fire, whereas
Oh,
Why?
I see what you're
applying it,
I don't hear that. I don't understand that. Why can't we apply for more than one or keep seeking other options while this is pending? I don't see that binds us in any way to waiting on potential
Right.
unlikely to arrive grant funding.
As long as you
Well, if-
proceed regardless. Yeah.
how do we know how much money we're dealing with?
We don't.
Well, we don't anyway.
We're dealing
Well,
with the
we're
fixed
getting a
amount.
pretty good idea at this point.
Yeah.
Well, we're applying for $500,000 from the Fed, right? That's the grant
That's
amount.
No, that's the question
that's the
before us.
maximum that you
So
could apply
assuming
for.
we don't, I think we'd have to apply, but assume we're not gonna get it. I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's the
Yeah.
strategy. And then
Yeah.
if we do
Right, you don't
get it-
count on it, of course
Yeah.
not.
I mean, we
Right.
still.
It's a
we-
10%
yeah.
probably.
I
Don't
think
even
But
we-
I still just don't see that this in any way binds us to that funding. It gives us the opportunity that if the circumstances change and it becomes more favorable, before we get too far down the line, that we could look at our scope a little bit differently than we would if we don't get that funding. But it's one of several options for trying to find that funding that we should be pursuing. And it just doesn't sound like there's enough staff time involved in resubmitting the same application over to warrant just not trying, because we just
Okay.
never know.
I agree.
When you refer to a time at which we need to make the decision, what time is that in your view?
Well, I mean, it kind of depends upon what the requirements of the grant are, which are still somewhat vague and unknown to me. I raised this at a recent meeting. It depends upon whether our information that we use to go out to bid, our RFP, has to include any requirements that that grant might hold us to. But again, I think that's a decision we can defer. We could go ahead and try to get the grant funds and keep moving forward with our project and
All right,
defer a final decision on whether to keep pursuing it at a later point.
Just proceed with that on the assumption that it's not coming through, but apply for it and see, and then there's always an extra $500,000 worth of expenditures possible.
Yeah,
right?
it's sort of like me applying for the FAFSA for my child.
Yeah, or buying a lottery ticket. So,
Yes, lovely fast.
all right, let's have a motion.
I move that we apply for the 2026 grant.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
I,
Aye.
Anyone otherwise minded?
What's
It's unanimous.
Just if I can backtrack for a question, like what is the likelihood, if they do decide, like when was the likelihood of time that they might, yes, no, they probably missed that.
well, if you take this year's budget as an example, we just got the budget a couple of weeks ago on March 14th.
I think the election complicated things. I think
Yeah.
everyone kind of expected that somewhat to happen.
That's
Um,
actually a fairly common occurrence in my experience.
Seems like
I'm
it goes
sorry.
every,
Yeah. I was gonna say,
Recently,
you would know better than I
it's been
would.
showing up that
You-
we've been
you-
getting
you-
a full
you live it.
budget with the final budget in the spring fairly frequently. unfortunately.
seems like the same pattern every year, right? Just
Mhm.
the tennis court flips around.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible it could be earlier next year, so, maybe December, they'll resolve it instead of waiting until March.
So maybe like this time next year, we might know. Because I'm just thinking, we probably could just proceed restating the obvious, like, as if we're not gonna get it, and then if we get a pleasant surprise, then move. But I think just try to seek other funding in the meantime, so. And I think I've
Yeah.
got some ideas we can get into later on how to do it.
Well, and I would say, I think the mayor's kind of nailed it, though. I think at this point, state of Maryland obviously is, having a fiscal crisis. I don't know what's being bandied about in terms of, LBI funding.
What's LBI?
Legislative bond initiative. So that is what the $300,000 we got was under that program.
Okay,
There really aren't that many pots of money. And what we were talking about in terms of the federal grant is the one pot of money under federal authorizations that our project even qualified for. So I would not delude ourselves that there's going to be all these other pots of money that we can pursue. They're simply not there. And they weren't there before. And I think with kind of everything, both politically and also at the state level, I don't see that many opportunities. I mean, certainly
it's all
we'll keep
getting
it.
worse, not better.
Correct.
Right.
Well,
In some
then
cases, it's a political problem. In other cases, it's an actual fiscal problem at the state level.
And even with that, it's like the Save America's Treasures, it was like really a stretch to kind of get it for a building of this small of a profile relative to what normally gets
Yeah, I
it.
mean, the National Park Service asked a series of questions with the assistance of the Maryland Historical Trust and certainly Wiedemann Architects. We managed to kind of explain our project a little bit better. And,
Mhm.
the good news is we did come out of the Senate Appropriations Committee as it existed at that time. Obviously, it's a different lay of the land right now.
well, do you think that our 300,000 is in jeopardy also?
There's been no indication of that.
Okay.
No, not at all.
We have considerably more lobbying leverage at the state level.
That's correct. I mean, I think that's sort of a question mark too, with kind of the composition of Congress right now. A largely Democratic state like Maryland may have more difficulty getting earmark funding than other states potentially.
All right, moving on. Preliminary FY 2026 budget. Our discussion tonight is in furtherance of introducing this at the next regular council meeting, and that differs from the timeline that I expressed rather over optimistically back, I think, Jerry Lee or Todd, someone asked the anticipated timeline back in January, February, and then I think even as late as our first budget meeting in February, I'd hoped to introduce it at this meeting. Various things conspired to prevent us from getting that far along. So this is the final planning meeting for introduction at the next regular council meeting, after which, assuming all goes as planned, you would vote it as an ordinance in May. So with that,
We could do a special meeting at the end of April, or no?
hopefully we'll get far enough tonight. We don't need to do that. And you need to introduce it in April if you want to vote on it in May. At the regular, each of those being at regular meetings.
Okay. But no, I was wondering because you had talked about trying to get it taken care of before the May meeting, so that,
Oh,
and so I was wondering, do we hold a meeting, special meeting?
yes, theoretically you could for a single purpose. I think it's not worth the candle at this point.
How many days does it have to be out before we can
6,
go from introduced? 6 days? I
6
think?
days.
Oh, so we're good.
I thought it was longer.
That's why we were talking about introducing it tonight and voting on it on April 10.
But now the thinking's due April, May.
Yeah, it'll just be
Okay,
the
yeah,
regular
yeah.
meetings.
I mean, it should be in good enough shape by April to make it
Yeah, I mean, it-
stampable.
But with,
Hopefully we'll have it pretty much nailed down by the time we leave tonight,
Yeah,
so the staff can prepare it for
Yeah.
introduction. Any introduced ordinance can be amended at the meeting at which it is adopted.
mhm,
The problem is, if the amendments aren't very minor, the argument arises that you're really introducing a
Yeah.
new proposal.
Yeah.
And that's particularly true for the budget.
mhm.
I mean, the public policy behind it is you haven't given notice if
Mhm.
what you vote on after amendment wasn't what you had introduced.
It's really like today should be like the theoretical introduction with draft notes on it, but then it really should be like a final article or nearly final article at April.
What
to go
you
through May.
introduce in May, you should have a bona fide expectation will be what you consider for adoption.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what you introduce in April
Yeah.
should be something that you have a bona fide
Expect
believe
to
you,
push
it
through,
will be
yeah.
substantially what you would adopt
Yeah.
in May.
Mhm.
In other words, it's better not to introduce it in April with sort of caveats about, well, we can revisit that amount.
Mhm. Got it.
Okay?
why wouldn't we do a special meeting in April just to solidify it?
Well, that would be the third month in a row in which we've had 2 meetings.
This is our special meeting.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
We're gonna send Todd out with a bang and.
Yeah.
Is it preferable?
you mean for the express purpose of just adopting it so that
Yes,
whoever the new person is,
yes,
and theoretically, there could be more than one new person
right.
in May, is not having to vote on something that they had no role in developing. I
Exactly.
mean, that
It's
is
new to
the,
them,
that is
yeah.
the underlying philosophical notion of not having the vote in May.
Right, so if we did it as a special meeting specifically. to-
Yeah, the question is, and this is not something we need to resolve
Sure.
immediately, but the question is, does whatever policy considerations underlie a preference to not have the vote in May, do those rise to the level of scheduling yet another special meeting for the sole purpose of passing the budget? It's a rhetorical question at this point. Why don't we? No, did we not unlock the door?
I thought we did, because everyone came in okay. If we're about to get stabbed. Hey, let's look out the window. Well,
They want the special meeting. Whoever.
Okay,
I don't know if that's the dog next door.
You rose to the occasion.
I was thinking,
There's a
oh,
little
I
play.
was forced. You okay?
That was a little intense.
let's, pres-
Edit that out of the
Yes.
recording.
Is there gonna be a
I will
good
see it. I will see it.
security
Yeah.
system in the new town hall?
okay,
Want me to take it away,
That
Chris?
did sound like someone banging at the door. right?
It was.
Definitely
Yeah.
was.
Yes.
oh, yeah.
But it was
But-
suspiciously loud, so it makes
Yeah.
sense that it's like the prank thing.
There,
so.
there've been several instances of that.
Oh,
Someone in the room can testify to it. It ends up, it may be just the current version of
Ding dong ditch or whatever.
pranking.
Mhm.
Okay, let's proceed to the budget planning, at the end of which, if you really want to, we can revisit the notion of having a special meeting. The other factor that enters into it that I didn't mention earlier is that it puts a premium on the staff. If we introduce it, we have to introduce it in April in any event at the regular meeting. So I would also rely on the staff's judgment of whether having yet another special meeting for the sole purpose of adopting it would put any particular burdens on them. Okay, all right, let's.
be very short.
let's Start, and we have a
Yeah, I was just gonna try to hit
show and
some,
tell.
hit some highlights and just kind of pull some things out. So the total projected revenues for FY 2026, as they currently stand. Whoops, sorry, I thought I should share screen. Let me try this again. Thanks, Gail.
Oh, no.
There we go. We're just about 2.07 million. This is a decrease of about 120,000 from the current fiscal year as things are budgeted. There are obviously some nuance differences from one of the categories to another, but I would say probably one of the biggest reasons for the decrease is a reduction in the prior year carryover amount. I would consider this amount preliminary. There are two major areas that I'm hoping to get some clarity on. One would be professional fees. I'm kind of seeing how those are trending out after we get through the end of this month and get some bills. The other is tree-related work. So we do a lot of pruning work and removal work in the spring. That typically is occurring after you all have already adopted your budget in many cases, which obviously makes it difficult to predict. So in both of these instances, for the time being, I am assuming that the full appropriated amount in FY 2025 in those two categories are fully expended. I did send over to Empire yesterday a request for pricing for some tree removal based on the list that Phil Normandy gave me. I'm hoping that will come in soon, which should help provide a little bit more clarity about what we'll actually spend on trees by June 30th. I also just wanted to call to your attention that I have not included any anticipated state grant reimbursement in FY 2026. Obviously, we do have those grant awards. There is $250,000 for Yendell Park and the $300,000 for Town Hall. The reason I am not recommending that we include the reimbursements at this time is the project schedules, as we just talked about, are somewhat uncertain, as well as the timeline for when the state will actually process the reimbursements.
So you don't have those funds either in 25 or 26. So that's $800,000.
750,000.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
so-
we originally put it in FY 2025. That was overly optimistic. And if you remember through the budget amendment process, then we had to go through the awkward exercise of taking those funds out. That's a lot more difficult when you predicated spending on the assumption that those funds will definitely be received between July 1st of 2025 and June 30th of 2026.
So you think Yendel money is gonna come in after that?
It depends how the project moves along. You know, obviously you've received some comments suggesting that additional funding be put into the project. Current information I have from Norton Land Design, based on their conversations with Montgomery Planning, is Montgomery Planning staff is inclined at this juncture to process the application, our mandatory referral application, administratively. There are required notifications that have to go out not only to Garrett Park residents, but to homeowner associations within a certain radius. That's just their process. If any comments are received through that outreach, then it will go to the Planning Commission. So there are two different timelines right now, depending on whether or not Montgomery Planning receives comments from the public.
I'm not sure
Any
if I under-
comments at all? Or
Any-
even a single comment?
That is Mike Norton's understanding.
Who commented about asking for more budget for it? Or where did
Well,
they
you've
comment?
received some comments about trees. There was a request for to have the area fenced that came from the Arboretum Committee. That's always something that you want to talk about later when you get to the capital budget.
Okay.
But it depends, I think, how you all want to respond to those issues and how much more community conversation you would like to have.
Just as a preview, like, could you clarify for me? You don't have that state funding for Yandel in revenue or in capital?
Both of these state grants are on a reimbursement basis. There is one exception under the legislative bond initiative that if the grant recipient can prove that they have undue hardship, then the state will sometimes directly pay a vendor. There's a process you have to go through.
Okay.
I don't think we fall into that category. With
So we pay the
the,
money and then get it back out of the
correct.
grant.
And with Yendel, that is under both the program Open Space and Community Parks and Playground. Those are both grant programs that are under the auspices of the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Basically, they only want to process one reimbursement. So they want the entire project done, the town to turn in, all its documentation, and then they will reimburse.
So the 277-ish that's in the Yandel Park for
That's
capital, that's town money, but it's included in the assumption that we get reimbursement.
correct, because we
Okay.
have to front it, yes. Just as a reminder, we talked about this at your special meeting exactly a month ago. The two primary revenue drivers for the town operations, as well as capital funding, are real property taxes and income taxes. Just as a reminder, all Garrett Park properties were reassessed by the state in calendar year 2023. Any increase in market value is phased in over the next 3 tax years. FY 2026 will mark the second year of that phase-in period. And per your direction on February 24th, this preliminary budget assumes that the real property tax rate remains unchanged.
But the number of houses goes up.
Right, there is a process of how that goes through. And especially when houses are demolished, there's kind of a process where it comes off the rolls, and then as construction occurs, it's phased in.
But doesn't that take a few years? I mean,
It can, when a house sells, then basically the process is the mere fact that the house is sold, basically, when it comes on the tax rolls, it comes up at the full assessed value. So the phase in basically is to accommodate those who own a home and not to feel the financial impact quite as much, all in one fell swoop. Income taxes, our budget for FY 2025 is $550,000. As we talked about last month, there are sizable payments that come in May and June. So those are obviously somewhat guesswork. One of the payments, the May payment actually matches another payment. It's just the way the state distributes the money, that the two values are always the same. So it was pretty easy to guess what May will be. June is obviously guesswork. Based on what I'm looking at, I think it's reasonable to assume that we'll bring in $570,000 in income taxes compared to $550,000 that is budgeted. The FY 2026 preliminary budget basically assumes that income taxes stay flat. I think there's a lot of market factors going on, particularly with the federal government.
Doesn't it go from 550 to 357?
And
Oh, that's
the
year to
date.
date as of February, end of
Oh, I see.
February, yeah.
Almost out.
So income taxes right now
Yeah.
are projected
There
to
it
remain
is.
flat. I just think there's too much uncertainty in the economy to assume it's going to continue going up necessarily. Just as a reminder, and this was discussed when you awarded the contract to Ecology Services in 2024, the annual household assessment will go up from $427 to $439. We did talk about this last month. Also, just wanted to just mention that when you look at the revenues, and this kind of shows up on the operating page, you'll notice that there was a line item to transfer to reserves because certain revenues are restricted. The two restricted revenues that are currently in the preliminary budget are highway user revenue and the Verizon PEG capital grants. And that has basically been the process for the past couple of years to make sure those funds are segregated and used appropriately. On the expense side, excuse me, as we've talked about last month, we are, I'm sorry, that should be total FY 2026 expenses. They're about 1.65 million, which is an increase of about 54,000. There are nuances from category to category, but I would say that the majority of the increase of about 54,000 is attributable to increased personnel cost. A lot of this will sound familiar to you because we talked about it last month. We do participate in the county benefit plans for health and dental and vision insurance. The county has been seeing, like many employers do, increases in both their health coverage and prescription drug coverage in particular is driving it. The preliminary budget assumes that those costs will go up 8%. That may sound like a lot, but as we talked about, I've worked places that got double-digit increases for, so 8% is actually not bad. You all at your meeting in February approved a wage adjustment for staff of 3%. We do currently have a staffing vacancy. I emailed you all last week to share that. Oliver Fitch Flores, who was one of our maintenance team members, his last day was Friday. Oliver had individual coverage and elected the least expensive coverage that you can possibly have. I did not assume the highest plan with family coverage, but I do think it's reasonable at least to budget for some level of family coverage because there is a disparity obviously between individual and family coverage cost. Trees, parks and grounds, you talked about this at your meeting in February as well. Per the Arboretum Committee's recommendation and your direction, I've included $96,600 for tree planting, pruning and removals. And Mayor Keller may wish to speak to this, but in that same line item 13.5, there is $60,000 for field restoration work at Cambria Park. Mayor Keller, is there anything you wanted to add about that at this time?
No, not,
Okay.
I mean, if people have questions, we
Okay,
can deal
we'll
with
just keep
it.
moving then.
That's fine. Thank you.
In terms of the capital budget, as things stand right now with the preliminary budget, we would be transferring $334,224 to capital. Included in your agenda packet is a sheet that shows the proposed FY 2026 transfer increments, which would provide funding for the town hall renovation, replacement fencing at Montrose and Claremont. Some of you may recall this from last year. Masonry wall repair near the pool property. There's a little increment that would be added to Yundle Park just to keep the funding level at the kind of grant award level. It does not add anything more than that. And then you may recall that back in 2023, I think it was, we assumed ownership of the Grotto property on Argyle. There is funding included for pointing the grotto stonework and doing some repair to the retaining walls. There is a very minimal slight reduction in the capital contingency, basically a couple $1,000. So that's sort of the quick overview.
Is that different than what we got in the packet?
No, it's just calling out some things that I thought you might want to highlight.
I would actually like to just hear a quick description of what is planned for the restoration of the ball field and how that relates to the planning for that area, the future planning that's also in the budget.
Well, as I understood it, the future planning figure that was in there before was a sort of an omnibus for everything from the utility right of way, which is sometimes referred to as Woods, Manny's Woods, all the way through the pool, the ball field, the playground, and the wooded area. And I just think it's an awful lot to bite off at once. Meanwhile, just one element of that, the ball field, is really in dire need of attention. It's about 5 years beyond where it really should have been renovated. Both Councilmember Paskowski and I have been dealing with various firms in an effort to get a sort of horseback estimate of what that might cost. What I did was go back to the 1998 renovation, and neither the firm that planned it nor the firm that executed it are still in business, unfortunately. But using that figure and adjusting for inflation, and then just sort of plugging in an additional arbitrary amount, because we'd like to do a little more than that. That was amending the soil, regrading, and hydroseeding.
So you haven't actually gotten a bid,
No,
you just kind of pulled that number out of
that's correct.
prior experience.
And so that would not include any of the additional border fencing kind of issues that were discussed at our last meeting.
It might. The fence on the far side is in remarkably good shape for its age, but it is the better part of 50 years old. And that is something we would need to get a professional assessment. And if it needs to be replaced, it might also be moved to give us at least a few more square feet. The overall area there is very constrained under the best of circumstances.
Well, it's a big slope and then the train tracks are there.
Yes.
Probably would take too long, but I have a diagram of it. Like, probably take too long to bring it up. I kind of still have the concern that it might cost a lot more than kind of redoing it the way it was done before. And then it may have looked really good when it was done before, but there's not really any drainage there. So it gets like really muddy. It doesn't really, it's like, I just feel like it needs to be looked at as a more comprehensive project. There's a good 30, 40 feet of potential real estate we could go still on that property. So like the property line is out by about where the fence is at the bottom of the pool. So if you're down like past where the sand pit is, there was like a tree that was removed there years ago. There's a fence like way down there. That's about where the property line is on the ball field. So that area could potentially move out, but because the further you move out, then the more the cost goes up because the more the slope goes down. But I think it could be reasonable to try to get like 15, 20 feet, even if that costs more. And the reason why is I think a fair amount of people are thinking that as kind of like a tot soccer thing or like a little kids baseball thing. It's not really, it's not fit for a real competition of almost anything for people who are over like an 8-year-old. But it could have a ton of use in town for kind of just a bunch of parents out playing soccer or a bunch of kids out playing soccer, or kids playing baseball, wiffle ball, kids throwing frisbee, people doing just about whatever. I think one of the key things to probably make the parameters of the field around is you need more width. It's way too narrow from where the fence is to where that willow oak has grown. It grew a lot in the last 20 years. So it's only about 50 feet. I would suggest that it's only really worth it if we can get up to like 90 feet. So you get like 30 yards wide, you get 40 yards in length without impacting the trees that are at the far end. And that's not even like the size of a mini soccer field. So like a real competition soccer field is like 110, I think, yards by like 70 yards. And then we're like way less than a quarter of that. Usually a mini soccer field is like a quarter of a regular field. This is really like a sixth of a regular field. So it's kind of like pushing the boundaries where it's kind of like practical to have like a fun kind of recreational game. And I think it would get a ton of use, in this town. I would suggest, and not suggest, but I just feel like I can't support the budget this year. And I've already not supported 3 budgets before, I think maybe 4, unless we can get like adequate funding to really kind of do that right. And I think we can do it without slowing down town hall at all. I even put together some numbers on things. I feel like we got a lot of things parked in the budget that are really for, later in this decade that could be, we could, get town hall done, get this field done well, and then try to backfill those other accounts in, the 28, 29 budget range. I just feel like I'm kind of tired of it after being here. I think this is my 7th budget go around. I feel like I remember a couple times we had all these like visioning statements up on the walls, I think twice, maybe 3 times. We went to the mansion out in Rockville, did like similar things. I feel like we churn these ideas over and over again. And I think we just don't get anywhere. So I'd like to really get somewhere.
So what does that mean to you budgetarily?
I think we really need to budget like 200, 250 for it and do it right and do it, extend it out, get new fences on all 3 sides so you keep balls in. I think even a fence on the front side, so it kind of obscures it a little bit, makes it seem like it's part of the pool. I think do something with, there's an expression from some community members to do something that maybe is like a gathering area. Like I don't agree with doing a pavilion. I think that's a maintenance trouble. Plus it really should be inside the pool where the peak season really would use it, and then it can be closed up and not need to be a worry in the off season. So I think that would be the kind of the spot for it. But outside of it could be, maybe it's a gravel area where the grass doesn't really grow between the gate and the willow tree. Maybe there's some hills that are like just mounded in on, between the tree and the other end of the park where people could, sit out, have a picnic or sun, or if there's, like an event like 4th of July or Beer Fest or anything else that's added, it's just a little bit more usable for those things. But I feel like that's, it's a high potential for that park, and I just don't, I'd like to fund it, kind of with some.
But where would the money
Like some real
come
intent.
from? Because right now we have 60, you're talking about another 140.
Yeah, I think from the very start, I would take the streets and roads and just knock that down to like 100, 150 in case we have an emergency. But look to backfill that in 28, 29 after we get town hall done, after we get this Cambria Park thing done. Because I think if we really stop delaying, I could work with a designer and be willing to do it to get it done, get it assessed properly for the drainage, the type of fencing, and fix the grading issues out there. Get something that's going to be maintainable. And most of the people I've talked to around town that actually play a lot of sports, they're wondering why we don't do an artificial turf, because it's almost everybody does now. But I know that would be just like an enormous delay in this town to try to do what the rest of the world does. I think we have to fail at what Garrett Park would do first and put in grass, and then having to do what's happening at Rock Creek Park now because the field is closed over there. It's got totally torn up in 2 years and they're replacing it. So it's closed right now. But I think that's a foregone conclusion. We have to do it wrong before doing it right in Garrett Park. But I think we could get just 150 there. The sidewalks, we're not realistically going to do sidewalks. I mean, if you guys don't want to hear it, I mean, I'm happy to just go home. Like, I feel like I waste
No,
time doing
I'm
this every
sorry.
day.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at your comment.
No, but
Which-
what we need is a recitation of how to reobligate funds,
Yeah,
because that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I feel like we've done this every year where we kind of just give a little extra money put into the capital budget and kind of spread it all around.
It's happened 3 times in my house.
Really?
Yes,
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I've talked to Chris about it. I'm sure it's
Who
4
is it?
nights, just like this.
It's frightening.
A kid?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Of course it's a kid.
Yeah, it's
No.
kinda sounded like a
Who
light
else would do
foot.
that?
I can't really catch them anymore.
Run that fast.
We need a ring camera.
I mean,
Exactly.
I'm equating from
Not a ring
teenagers with
camera.
kids.
Ring camera, you have to ring the doorbell. He's not, so you need a camera, but not a ring.
Right.
Just any old
Oh.
camera. Well positioned.
Yeah, like we have one in our backyard, so I can see one coming. It's coming.
We should just
Um,
open the door.
It's called anyway.
Yes.
It's like that, Jeremy.
Yeah.
So you want to take 200,000 from somewhere else?
Yeah, and sorry, I was jumped ahead thinking you might have been making light of my thought, but I feel like
No,
I've
no.
done this every year, and we just keep moving little kind of like Christmas club money around all over the place, and we don't really do any projects. I feel like we can do the parks, the grotto, the pool wall for probably $250,000 now, get a lot of use out of it. And if we find a way to bump up our town hall money, I think we can make a bigger bump by moving that street money out, moving it in there, moving
Well,
some other things.
I guess
and
what
make it
I'm
work.
struggling with is, at a previous planning meeting, can't even remember which one, the agreement was to set aside some planning funds for the overarching Cambria area. So it seems a little bit in conflict to me, to invest that much in one element of that, unless we're making a decision up front that there will be no change in use of that portion of the park. In which case, you know, what is the planning for? Is it for the whole area, or is it really just for the part that is more or less Manny's Woods and the dog park? You know, the former tennis court.
That's a whole different bucket of money from what we're talking about now.
Well,
But it could be blended.
but to me, why would you set aside money to plan for a whole area and then invest $250,000 into one element of that area for actual work before you've even done any planning? That's the part I'm having a hard time reconciling in my head.
Well, the planning was really, that was proposed last year, and I put together like the $60,000-ish number really together quickly, because it just based on different planning exercises we'd done, you know, at firms for other jurisdictions. I think most notably one over in Kensington, I was thinking of it, look back at kind of what we charged on that and basically doubled it, because it was a lot more closer to now than then. But the idea on that last year was to really have a planning process very similar to what Yandle was and very similar to what Town Hall was, where, you know, you would hire somebody that knows current trends and knows the technical things, could put together a couple different options, have them out for everybody in town to be able to kind of see them and comment on them. But, you know, we pitched that last year, and that was the first thing. Phil, you came in, you wanted to zero that out. You negotiated to cut it in half, but I don't understand that. The whole point of that is to kind of like get everybody in town to have an equal share of what, you know, could be there. But I think this is almost like a punt idea. It's like, just, you know, 99% chance that's the only flat area with grass in town. So I don't know why we would take it away and do something
We have
else.
schoolyards behind Garrett Park Elementary has a big field.
It's not
Yeah,
ours.
it's managed by the county though, and so they permit the activities that happen behind there most
But
of
it's a
the
big
time.
amount of
Yeah,
grass.
Yeah.
we do play softball there. It's really kind of dodgy because it's in such poor condition, but the benefit of the field over there is a lot of people will be able to use it during the pool season, like just go out. Like I would be out there with friends and we'd probably say, you know, go out there at 9 o'clock in the morning and go play soccer on a Sunday, but or whatever day it is. And I think that would kind of grow, just like the volleyball grew in the pool. That started with, there was a lot of resistance to do anything changing there, and all of a sudden a lot of people that wanted to play just kind of got together and kind of, we ended up making our own funding, kind of making it work. So I don't think that's as realistic with something the size of that field. I think it would get a ton of use. And I think just, that's the one where it's 99% chance that you would bring in somebody else, they would, as a consultant, like I used to do this as a consultant, that I can imagine what you would put there besides a field, if that's the only real field you have in town.
I struggle with that as well. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to understand,
Yeah.
you know, what we're actually, you know,
So-
visioning.
Yeah.
Another question I have is, do we have any recommendations related to that field from the Parks Committee? And has this proposal to do a renovation?
Parks and open space?
Yes.
No.
So they're not even aware that we're considering adding funding for renovating.
They were,
that
because then
park
Pat
space.
Maloney sent a message the last time we talked, where sort of like you recited it, basically saying that they wanted to put a camera pavilion or something else,
Yeah.
which I like the
Make it
idea of, but not,
accessible.
I like the idea of it, but not taking away the field to do it. But so it's not like you can, you know, hire a contractor and do this overnight. It would have to be announced, but I just don't see how it makes sense to do anything else. And if we can put it forth now, get the message out around town that this is going to be kind of fixed up now, and there's some extra spaces that could be made into those kind of other gathering areas outside of what would be a rectangular field, it could be doable to get it done by this fall. You need to plant grass in the fall. So I think we could get together like a design with Clark Azar, figure out all
But
the
not
drainage and
take in the
fences.
rest of the area on the dog park and the
No, that would
playground
be
area
separate.
and
I
all
mean-
that. We're talking about just a finite area
No,
of
it was,
the
yeah, it was
field.
separated. It was the big concern about trying to have an open planning process last year. I think just by, it was just like Yandle Park. There's an outsized kind of interest by some neighbors that, that kind of resist doing an open plan. So I think there's less of that for the field part. So I would just recommend go forward with the field part and then try to do the area east of the pool as a follow-on. If the field is
Is that the
successful.
dog park?
Yeah, well, there's no dog park, but the
Well,
old
that-
tennis court that gets used
yeah.
for dogs, but I think that could be done the next year. So I think there's even enough money if you shift it around to kind of, if you figure that town hall shouldn't take more than 2.5 million all in. If
We have 2.5 million now.
I think we can, if there's 3.1 in here total. And town hall wouldn't be built until 27 fiscal year. So all the contractor payments, like Phil was talking about, like you wouldn't be making contractor payments until fiscal year 27. So you'd have 3.1 in there to work with, kind of, if you can get, figure out how to have 2.5 in there going into fiscal year 27, you have enough money to kind of do town hall. And then you have several $100,000 to shift around to do these things. I think you could do both ends of Cambria Park. You could hold a contingency. You could do the small projects like the pool wall, the grotto, hold money in case there's an emergency for streets. But the rest of those kind of things, rather than kind of just continuing in a way we just continually just like stockpile money, year after year with the hopes of doing a project in the future. Like, just get some projects done and then build it back up.
Barbara, does reapportioning allocations within the budget, within the capital budget need to be done in connection with the adoption of the annual
Yes,
budget?
that is typically how it's done because you're making a
Well,
decision to,
I understand
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
typically how it does. Does it have to?
I think it has to because you're appropriating funds or taking away funds to individual line items, just as you are doing in the operating budget.
Okay, so we need to make up our mind now whether we want to maintain 372,000 in the streets and roads.
Yeah, if I may just make a comment. So basically, I'm looking, I don't have FY30 added on what I'm looking at. We're projected to have we don't have any road work that is planned for FY 2026. Between FY 2027 and 28, there's about 150,000, and you have sufficient funding within highway user revenue that could be used for that. The issue becomes, and we've talked about this before, in FY 2029, where there's about $650,000 worth of road work. I think if you choose to move funds out of streets now, I think
Is
there's,
this 35.3?
it is, no, those are all
26.1.
ARPA funds. It's 26.1.
Okay.
I think if
That's fine with
funding
me,
is
sir.
taken out of 26.1, there has to at least be an agreement that when the town gets reimbursed, like from the state for Yendel,
Mhm.
that gets replenished, because otherwise I think you could potentially be running into trouble in FY 2029. I don't think getting through, like I say, there's no road work that Clark Azar came back out, looked at the roadways recently. There's a couple utility patches that are failing. I need to contact the utility companies about that. There's enough in highway user revenue, once again, to get through 27 and 28. I think 29 is where there at least needs to be an understanding that
Yeah.
when we get reimbursed, that account needs to be replenished.
And what is the planned use for 26.2 under the capital budget? The sidewalk?
I think it was just assuming that the sidewalks there may need to be some improvement at some time. That funding's been there for a while.
121,
26.2.
26.
121,000.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so there's not a specific use. That's been sitting there for a while.
And we kind of caught up on all the side work that was kind of laying around, like the Waverly and the other block of Oxford. And we started talking about those in 2018, I think.
Yeah, they're fairly new.
So they finally got done 6 years later, but that's kind of unfortunately, that's the Garrett Park pattern. But I still am uncomfortable with the streets idea. I mean, I wouldn't advocate for just kind of pushing everything off and, having a big emergency later, but I worry about being over aggressive continuously with the streets. And, I've looked around recently, it feels like Albemarle needs paving potentially, but looks like it could hold on a couple of years. I think the block that I thought was gonna be paved next, which was the
Yeah.
Kenilworth one between, I think it's Argyle over to Albemarle, and I was surprised that it was actually the other block that got paved, which I thought was in better condition. So I'm kind of curious, and don't need to know the answer now, but I've asked for before, and I'd like to know what streets the engineer is proposing to do in the near future, and which ones they say are in 2029. Because I feel like
I can tell you if
Okay.
you like.
So I just feel like
Yeah, and
we tend to like, this, if you grade it, building, graded amenities on a grade A to F, I feel like this building's like a C, and it's been looking to get improved, and we have planned to turn a C into an A, but those fields are like D and F, and I feel like we keep moving our streets from like B to A, and I feel like we can let some of the streets kind of linger at B and C a little bit longer to kind of get some of these other long deferred projects done that people get more use out of.
And how confident are we that with 200,000, we could make the difference that you seek? In other words, I
Is
mean,
that all it's gonna really cost?
Yeah.
I feel like we're gonna be in good shape, and then Chris and I have talked about this like 9 times. He's
you
very.
think so too?
No, he's very
No,
concerned that I'm overshooting
the
it.
philosophical difference here is this.
Mhm.
Look where we are on planning Yandell, a much smaller space that came with constraints that limited the scope of the planning. If we do not renovate the ball field in a way that, what I was suggesting is it would be in a way that would meet the immediate needs of, just among other things, safety,
Regrading.
but
and
not,
seeding it.
but not foreclose the more elaborate or extensive things in the future.
Mhm.
Inevitably having to make compromises of some kind. Otherwise, I think we're really talking fiscal and calendar 27 or 28 before we get to this again. That was the sort of, for lack of a better term, policy or conceptual underpinning of my suggestion that we do the limited but sufficiently sufficient renovation of the ball field.
But leaving
But
the fence where it is and not going down the hill like what Steve's talking about, which is gonna be a more costly.
I can't commit one way.
ambitious
Well,
thing.
it certainly would not be advancing at 30 feet because we'd
Right.
need a 60-foot retaining wall. I mean,
Right.
$250,000 doesn't even begin to touch
Yeah, the
that.
more you go, the more expensive it gets.
Right.
But since the subject's been broached, maybe we need to find out a little more what's contemplated in some of the unobligated capital funds. We've just addressed streets and curbs. Sidewalks appears to not be specifically earmarked for a specified contemplated project.
the last time Clark Azar was out, which looking at the sidewalks, I believe, was last year, and obviously they're in good shape.
What about equipment?
Except,
Barb?
I talked to George, there is nothing, that little bit of money is to basically pay for outfitting the truck, which has already occurred, and the bill's in process for payment. But I did talk to George Miller, and he said that he cannot think of any equipment that basically would be coming up in the next 5
It's
years.
Probably a small amount to hold in a reserve anyway, just in case something
Yeah.
comes up. I was looking more at like shifting some of the bigger things that I
Yeah.
don't think we're gonna do sooner, and it just,
So I think the parallel, I think we need to leave 28.2 alone.
agree.
Nothing further to be said. 28.1, utilities, are there specific
Yeah.
projects contemplated there?
Yes. I'll tell you exactly why it was there, because I put it there.
Okay, no, well, that's what this
I couldn't remember
exercise
what that was.
appears.
It was-
This exercise may only be for my benefit since I wasn't here the last time around. What is,
And so the idea was that we were thinking about redoing the traffic flow at Penn Place sometime sooner rather than later.
the,
Penn Place, the traffic, in other words, the whole.
oh,
park.
traffic flow?
Right.
So relocating utility poles,
We had to because the thought was they're gonna be in the way.
they
So-
are in the way.
So we had to put money in, started to put money in to build up a budget to be able to move those poles, because at one point, I think it's gonna be, could be up to $100,000 to have Pepco move the damn things.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, we talked about this during the budget amendment that you just adopted. About $10,000 of that 63,000 will likely be needed to help with the Waverly project. It will basically be paying for part of getting the Pepco permitting and getting power to the poles.
I thought that we had 73,000 in it, we took it down 10,000 last time as a way of accommodating 10 grand.
Yeah, I can just say that in the ARPA funds, there's just not going to be sufficient funding. So basically, the ARPA project will be defined as the purchase of the poles and the base traffic systems contract, everything that's Pepco related. We didn't know the number, so we had to move it someplace else because otherwise you run the risk of losing ARPA funds.
Right, but I thought that we had, during the last budget amendment, we had moved it from 73 down. We had moved it down because we knew that it was gonna be 10 grand, or at least we put a place.
Yeah, we didn't know that when the FY 2025 budget was adopted. It was only through the
Correct.
amendment process.
No, it was the last budget amendment.
Yeah, it was, that accounted for the 10,000. I'm just saying, if anyone's looking at the 63 and thinking that full 63 is available, it's not, because we haven't paid anything to traffic systems.
Well, it was 73. Wasn't it?
The amount that's, so if you go down and look at the capital sheet and you look at the sidewalk project.
35,
So we took it out of utilities. The lighting, Mary recommended that it be in 35.3F, which is sidewalks.
Mhm.
And basically there's a residual amount that is owed to SFMS, and there's also and that's where the base contract is for traffic systems, is coming out of 35.3F.
It's a 74 plus
Right.
10-ish from above.
Right.
And the rest is held for the future project. Is it, Phil, is that the poles that are out in the parking lot or something
Yes.
else? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would suggest, that as much as I would love to see them moved as well as part of a comprehensive project, I just don't know that we're gonna be able to get a comprehensive project there in front of Cambria Field and Cambria east of the pool.
Yeah.
Can't we just hold those kind of things instead of just holding hostage money in the budget for years? Can we look to say, hey, can we clear the deck with some of these other projects and then rely on the 3 to 4 to hopefully it grows money that we put in the capital every year to kind of start staging all those other projects that are later in the decade? That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, the utilities line item, I can't say this was all of it, but I think there was also just a recognition that the poles on Strathmore tend to get hit quite often.
Mhm.
We bought
We-
some extra.
We
ones.
do have 2 extra that we have bought. And generally, as long as we can identify a driver, and
Yeah.
typically if they hit it hard enough, basically that gets handled through insurance.
So if we reallocate the money, which increasingly sounds like a reasonable idea, but there is still the issue that I have learned a lot about from you guys over the last almost 2 years, which is sort of public outreach and, you know, getting the community involved in selecting this choice. It seems that we are, you know, we're making a decision for the good of the town, which I'm not saying isn't a good idea, but I mean, maybe if we do it and we say we're working on the field, but the rest of this project is here for you to design going forward, give us ideas, and in 2 years, open that up. This is we have to pitch this as a more finite, discrete, immediate need, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress that it would be important to stress that it's being thought of, it's not a change in the use, it's enhancing the use that's already there. So
Okay.
I'm sure there's a small percentage of the town that would like to change the use. I've heard 2 people that say it before. I've heard 1 person exactly in the town that thinks there should be a sidewalk on every street, and it's you. But you know, it's like there's always these kind of opinions, like it's It's
Well,
just- I
but
think we gotta,
there isn't a plan, so
Yeah.
for a sidewalk anywhere else at the moment.
Right.
So looking, there's no point messing with small stuff here, but
Yeah.
looking at 28.2, that's been identified as one larger item that could be revisited and from which monies
Storm
could be,
drain.
monies could be reallocated. The other would be 28.1.
I thought you just said you didn't want to move 28.2.
Right.
No,
Because I
what
agree with you. Storm drains?
were you thinking of the planning? There's
I'm sorry,
another
I meant
75,000.
26.2 Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
sidewalks.
Yeah.
Sidewalks.
If I said 28.2,
So I'm confused.
mis-
What is your point on 26.2?
we're identifying larger unobligated capital funds accounts that might be reallocated.
To the park.
And to town hall.
And
so you
your point related to 26.2 was? That it could be reallocated.
26.2 is large enough. There are no immediate projects on the horizon.
For sidewalks.
Mhm.
So I would consider that a line item
Okay.
that could be
And
looked
we're
to
not
for-
meaning to comment about
for-
28.2.
for
at all.
reallocation, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just think
28.2 is
for-
sacred.
for
right?
reasons
Just better
unrelated to
not touch it.
anything
Yeah.
we're talking about here,
Yeah.
28.2 and 32.2, we just leave as is,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
okay?
They're better
Fair
off
enough.
untouched.
All right.
I don't,
The-
I'm sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Phil.
well, no, I don't mean to interrupt, but the other line item we were discussing was 28.1 utilities. And I guess the only other line item of any sufficient size that we might also explore would be 32.6, which is capital planning other. And remind me of what that was.
That was for
That's
the
the
broader
redo of the-
study of Cambria
the-
about
yeah.
all the surrounding
Oh,
areas.
oh.
Yeah.
I thought there had already been an agreement to plus up the planning for the park in mid-year.
To
do
plus
what?
out, which is what?
There
was-
Allocate more?
Plus up, yes.
Okay.
There was some
Um,
discussion about that,
Yeah.
yes.
But we didn't actually do it at the mid-year.
The shrewd way to do it
It was
would be
part of-
to leave the planning and improve the field now.
Yeah, they could be separate and the planning could be held to kind of look at the other end of the park, or
That would be good.
if it's doable where the field couldn't be delayed, where it makes fiscal year like a fall construction impossible, I'd be willing to volunteer the time that make it possible. I know, Chris, you have your worries that we could be running against time trying to get something constructed this year if it's more elaborate, but yeah, I wonder if the planning money couldn't be used, like if everybody wants to get started on having an open process to explore potential uses down the other end of the place, or if want to rather just let the field, be proposed, find if the community's okay with it, and if that's successful, then use that as a springboard to look at these things.
I would suggest that you try and get the field, since that seems to be the big thing, try and get the field taken care of. Because you can
Yeah.
argue also it's a safety issue, it's gonna be a lot of little kids running around on it.
Yeah,
That we put money into that, and I'm still concerned about making up the $500,000 that we may or may not get
yeah,
for the town hall, so we have some money left over. I don't mind taking 50,000 out of the utilities, that'd bring it down to 13, which would give us still that 10,000 that we need or
Yeah.
so for the Petco.
I wonder if like in some 6, 7, 8 year out project after we get all this other stuff done, it might be to kind of redo the whole area where the power poles might be. I think Dick Pratt even drew sketches of this years ago. I
Oh,
heard there
yes.
was like a process, and I think there used to be planners there, but I think there may be ways to kind of recreate that, but it's a much lower priority than these other projects, but I'd love to like keep a glimmer of hope of like making that place beautified in the future, but get these other things done first.
Right, and that's why
Yeah.
we drain most of it.
So what about the streets? money? Because there's a big pot of money in there. Are we gonna leave that or move some of that?
Barb, you were gonna tell us which streets they had envisioned?
Yeah, so there's two things that make up these numbers. As a reminder, we've been moving towards concrete curbs because they
Right.
are, so in no work in 26, there's probably an opportunity to combine 27 and 28 because the amounts are small. I want to do the roads first because they're in two different tabs. I have this right on, in fiscal year 2027, it would be Keswick Street from Strathmore to Cambria.
Gotta do that one.
Uh,
I don't know, that was just done, like, when was that done? Like 7 years?
Decades ago.
From
Not long
Stratford.
ago.
to
Yeah.
Cambria. So
Cambria.
that's the northern side, just for the record.
Oh,
No,
uh,
it's-
She
it's-
said
Oh, I guess
Stratford
so.
to Cambria.
And
I'm reading it right.
your block was done after that.
Oh,
one, I
Wait a
think.
minute, maybe. I'm
That's what
reading
she
it.
just said.
I'm sorry, it's
sorry.
Keswick, the south end to Oxford Street.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
That makes more
that's
sense.
27. In
That's us.
28, it would be Raleigh, Strathmore to Cambria.
So Raleigh.
This is also in 28, Cambria, Keswick to Raleigh. And I can pull it up, but generally as we're doing street work,
Keswick to Raleigh. Oh, so Cambria.
the prior decision was to try to do concrete curbs. So I'm gonna take a guess here that where there
Cambria
aren't
already has
concrete
them.
curbs already.
Cambridge, yeah.
If we're in the vicinity, we would be doing concrete curbs and around the same
So
time.
that's Cambria by like the area that goes parallel to the pool, but not the part up the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm willing to go take a look at these, but I remember like a lot of these, they were done in the last 6-7 years and there's just not noticeable problems with them where they don't seem like they couldn't hold on a couple more years past that. I worry that the Carcase, our engineer that does this, is just a little bit looking for too much perfection. I think our roads are better than the vast majorities of residential areas around the county. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that we want to let them degrade or be below average and even, but I feel like we just keep doing those over and over again, and it holds money out of all these other projects. So
Could we take a step back, because I'm confused, it's not that I have a problem with this exercise of considering moving things around in the preliminary budget, but I'm not quite following. Are the things that are listed in the summary memo covered in the budget or not? Because I don't see, for example, where the pointing of the grotto stone work and the town fencing and the
Yeah,
masonry
it's kind of why I tried-
wall,
okay.
and also the planning for Cambria Park. I
Okay.
don't see
If
those
I may,
things in
if
the
you,
budget.
yeah, if you go to 29 point, I'm just gonna start with the first one, 29.1.2, which is public spaces, other public spaces. You'll see that there is $10,000 in unobligated funds. And there's a proposed transfer increment of 2,500. That's because the estimated cost of doing the work at the grotto is 12,500.
Okay, thank you.
If you go through 27.3, see if I got my thing, other maintenance. As a reminder, some of this was discussed a while back with the budget amendment, but the work that was done at the maintenance shed, which was $11,550, is coming out of that $15,840. That bill had not been processed as of the end of February. So there'll be a residual amount left out of that $15,840. What would be added to it was $30,710. That would pay for the fencing and it would pay for the pool wall repair. Does that help, Charlie?
Yes, but what about the planning? So it's listed in the memo, but there was no additional funding set aside for the park planning that I can see.
There was not. Mayor Keller and I talked about the funding that was available, and what is listed in the transfer increments is the outcome of that discussion.
So I just want to put to my colleagues, I don't mind moving, for example, like the sidewalk money seems like a very easy one to move because there's nothing planned for it. But I think we should take into account both the future planning that the council had said that was a priority, as well as the ball field.
Well, I think we're saying we need, the priority is an overall plan for what I'm calling the dog park, the playground, the woods, and the field is an incremental piece of that, but we still need some kind of a design and a plan for the rest of all that space. It seems to me, I think the dog
I'm just
park
gonna
is-
posit that once we say that we're keeping the field as the field, why are we even bothering to plan for anything other than the dog park? Because why would we change the woods from the woods? Why would we change a playground from a playground? If we're keeping the field, I think we ought to all just be honest and say, we'd like to keep everything to the east or to the west of the pool, the same uses.
Yeah.
And we should focus our design work on the smaller portion to the east of the pool, because that's what I'm hearing actually in all of these preferences
The
for keeping the
likely-
field.
It's a very likely result, and I think it could be thought to like enhance it. I mean, I have heard off like just some somewhat unique opinions from some people. I heard from one friend I know, which happens to be a retiree, so it's not what you would expect. Like,
Oh, they want
family-
pickleball courts.
No, not there was that too, but so not what you might expect. That's like young person with families, but that person said, well, why don't you just flip flop and move like the playground over to where the dog court is, and then move where the dog court use is happening, and then move that, the dog park over to the other side. I've heard other people say, well, it might be more interesting dog park if it was kind of like through the woods, which is really like a lesser selling dime farm anyway. But I mean,
When was the last time you hung out at the dog park?
not in a while.
No
one
I was
goes to
there
that
once,
dog
and we shot basketball. and
It's
I
a
got,
terrible dog
I
park.
got
Garrett Park dogs hang around where the humans hang around
yeah, they just sit.
and beg treats.
Yeah.
It looks pretty
They aren't
terrible.
Yeah.
being Richard Halliburton running around the.
Yeah.
It would be used if it
exploring
was
the-
any
Well,
good.
I'm
They're not
sorry,
galloping.
we digress.
Yeah.
My understanding, because when I came on board, I took things, as they lay,
Mhm.
was that there was a discussion at some point before I was paying attention that the entire area, which is called the Cambria Complex, I
Mhm.
believe you even chose a title, was to be addressed as a whole.
Mhm.
And conceptually, maybe that makes sense, but here we are a year later or more than a year later and nothing's been done.
Right.
Yeah.
And we did
And-
delay the planning. I want to be clear about
I'm
that,
sorry?
because I was an advocate for delaying the planning,
Oh,
because we
okay.
had so many other things on our plate at
Right.
the time. We delayed the
Same.
planning.
For
first.
whatever reason, we're here. And to what Stephen said earlier, I think if we spend $1 million on a plan and make it as elaborate as possible, what are the real chances that the ball field will be substantially changed from a plan?
And I don't disagree with him,
Yeah.
and.
Same with the
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't actually believe I said what he said I said earlier,
Okay.
but I did several
remember
years
that.
ago say, I don't see the field changing from the field. I don't see the playground changing from the playground, and I don't see the woods changing from the woods. So I don't understand why we're trying to plan for the whole complex, when really what people are really wanting changed is upgrading and fixing to the west of the pool.
Which is
I
just the dog park.
recognize that there have been some proposals for doing
Yeah.
something different at the field, though.
Mhm.
I'm not one of those people who's an advocate for that, and
Neither
I
am I,
don't hear a
yeah.
lot of advocacy for that here. But we definitely have had advocates come and say, oh, couldn't we do something completely different at the field location? That's
Well,
one of the reasons why I was asking
realistically-
what the Parks Committee has
Mhm.
said. What kind of
We're
guidance they
piecemealing
need.
it, which is
Right.
fine. Realistically, switching the playground and, other
it's a
part, the
fine, it's
dog
fine.
park, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It is ridiculous.
It's not cost
I'm
effective,
telling you guys said that, so.
right?
Well,
I mean,
it's just
kidding.
not cost effective, and
Yeah.
also,
So,
as
There's a lot of people
as
opposed
a
to it,
parent,
too.
Yeah.
most of the time, many times that I spent at the playground,
Yeah.
it was while one child was in the toddler soccer class on the
Mhm.
field, and the other kids could play in the playground.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, you're connecting the playground to the pool. Putting the playground on the other side of the pool makes it very inconvenient to all those other
Yeah.
joint uses.
I think I would agree. I think it'd be a matter of like, the sensible thing is to kind of enhance those uses, like the woods maybe would get used more, like, they don't do it anymore, but our kids used to ask us to take them over to the Audubon Society over on, Jones Bridge Road, because they like to go over there. There's like a place where you could make like little huts and things in the woods and all these logs, and kids love to do that kind of stuff, but that could happen with almost no funding in that. Down in the well of Cambria Woods, those kind of things could be done. I think it's very unlikely you would change those things, and it's I think part of the conundrum is, and park planning was proposed last year, and the idea was to get like somebody like a Norton, somebody that's outside of the town to come in, do a wide open process. And then the irony of it is, it used to be me. I used to like do this. I used to get paid to do this. I'm right across from that park. So it would be a huge shortcut, but that was what I was encouraged to not do, was to opine on things that are kind of obvious results that you would get. But instead to kind of like leave it out there to be wide open. So you almost like, it's almost like a Garrett Park tradition. You got to like entertain all these thoughts of like flip-flopping the playground and, you know, I don't know, building a heliport and, you know, the dog park or whatever it is. I mean, it's just kind
Well, I
of
mean, the
like
dog,
things that you wouldn't, it
Yeah.
wouldn't really get past early rounds. Like, it's almost like we gotta do them. We gotta go through the pain of doing them. And like, I remember like learning the lesson from an old mentor of mine who was really good at dealing with those kind of like public meetings. And we were amazed at how many difficult people from the Upper West Side he was dealing with in this one meeting. And we all were giving him praise afterwards. Like, how do you do this? And he said, well, you told us that there's like great value you get. Like, the vast majority of comments you get are either people telling you that they all have to feel like they're heard. And the vast majority of comments are people telling you things that are already like no brainers that you would do anyway, some of your first steps. And they got to tell you like it's a novel thing. A lot of other things are like outlandish ideas that aren't really realistic. There's like 3% where it's like that comes in and it's like you would have never thought about it, but it unlocked a whole different potential. That's the big benefit.
but let's come back to this and let's consider, can we put a motion
No,
forward?
we just come to a consensus here,
Okay,
unless you want to formalize it more.
My understanding
I
was
think-
Chris and I spoke about the deterioration of the field. So the question is, rather than doing an overarching plan, to take some money and fix a very
yeah,
decrepit field that needs grading and, you know, a remix and a redo. And then we can also, on a later date, when we have the money and time and a thoughtful process that includes community input,
sure.
to look at an overarching plan. I thought that's, Chris, what you were trying to get
But we
done.
don't need an overarching plan,
We
it
don't.
sounds like.
Well,
It sounds
For the
like
other
we
part,
can
maybe.
do one part of it this year and then do the dog park and another. If you took the 30,000 for the overall plan and put that to the dog park, I'll bet you could get a pretty good dog park.
But what I think we need that for Cambria Park.
Yeah, and I'm not sure everybody in town would be in favor
All
of
right.
giving the whole
30.
place to the dog park.
I mean, all right,
Yeah.
but sure, but let's do the field this year. I mean,
Get that
the
done.
question is, how much do we really need for the field and where do we take it? But it sounds like that's been resolved because we can take it from the sidewalks. And it sounds like, I mean, you're saying we need 200,000.
That's just my wild guess, but I really appreciate, I gotta say, I gotta really appreciate everybody hearing it out and giving me a little bit of rope on this, because obviously I'm kind of passionate about it, but the 200 is just like, it's just the ballpark out of my top of my head, but I wonder if it's worthwhile if everybody is okay with it. Maybe I could just talk with Jason Azar to kind of see what he would think might be the cost and the scope of doing that, because I think if it is done, and it's going to be a significant amount of money if we go that way, it's got to be done right, where we don't kind of redo it and continue to have like muddiness and lumpiness and that kind of
Right.
stuff. So,
It needs to
So
be
for the
regraded.
mechanical, budget mechanics here, Chris had originally
That's what I was gonna
proposed in
ask.
operations, parks and grounds funding. But could it also be that we just put some lump additional funding under capital, under parks, where I'm trying to find under public spaces, 29.1, put some additional funding there and
Like the 16.
do, like, not commit ourselves to exactly what we're going to do, but with the idea that with some additional communication and community outreach, that may be the direction we go. Upgrade the field, maybe do it even a little more if we get positive community feedback, embark on some planning for what to do with the area west of the pool. Anyway, I don't think we have to commit tonight to exactly what we're going to do, but we could all agree that as we move towards the end of the planning cycle for town hall, that is the area we've already said was a priority for us to commit towards the next big project in town. So let's go ahead and put our money where our mouth is and bulk up that capital area of the budget And then we
See
need,
what it's
there's
really
some
gonna
process
cost.
that we need to go through to actually get to committing exactly what we're gonna do. That would be my proposal for how we.
I like it because then it might work out timing anyway, because over the winter, we'd have more information about what town hall is really going to cost and an estimate with more detail, and we might know whether we need to really scramble to get more than 2.5, or maybe 2.5 is enough. Maybe it's less, then you might be able to kind of know whether we'd be able to earmark. There'll be some fruit coming out of like a planning process that maybe happens in the second half of the fiscal year, not right away, but.
Which
Well,
means the
get money.
field won't get fixed this year. It will be next
No, I
year.
think we're saying get the field fixed, but Jerry Lee is suggesting putting money in to deal with the other.
I
East
see.
of the
Okay.
pool, right?
I
Well,
see.
no, I was suggesting to put.
The whole thing, right?
I like the idea of fixing the pool, of the field.
Mhm.
I'm just saying, rather than committing exactly tonight, what exactly we're going to do. It
Just
seems
put a
like there's a
chunk
little
of
more
money.
community outreach and process that we might want to undertake, so we're not surprising everyone. But go ahead and put that bulked up money under parks and open spaces in capital instead of under operations. So combine what we're
Mhm.
pulling out of sidewalks and the operations extra money together in that spot.
Operations. where are you
And
talking?
keep some planning money as well, maybe plus up the planning a little bit.
Yeah, I Phil, what Jerry Lee's referring to is there's
Trees, parks, and
60,000 and 13.5.
Okay,
And I mean, you can handle it however you want. Typically, as Chris and I were talking about, typically something like a field restoration in and of itself isn't capitalized because it doesn't
Yeah.
depreciate.
Okay,
But you can certainly, there's no, hard and fast rule. We just tend to look at capital when we're doing fixed assets. But if it works better for you all to kind of see it all in one place,
what,
that's fine.
I'm okay either way, it just.
Can we
we're
take
talking
two hundred
about moving
thousand
money
from
around in capital,
sidewalks
so.
There's
and
a-
leave 50,000 for emergencies,
Hold
51,000?
on 1 second, because I need my
I'm trying to,
recollection refreshed on the
26.2.
operating budget.
The 175
Line,
number.
line 13.5, 175. Remind me what that,
there is.
how that breaks out?
There is $60,000 in there that is for 60 for the field,
Field.
which was the number, Chris, you gave me. So I think
Oh, okay.
what is being proposed is to take that 60,000 out, move it to
Capital.
29.1
Parks.
point.
I didn't even realize you had money over
29.1.2.
there.
Well,
Yeah.
but that implies
Or you could.
something more than just renovating the field. Then I think the message we're sending is that it's beginning to look more like a capital project, which means retaining walls and fences,
For-
which I view more as capital expenses.
Yes. If,
Well, there is that extension of the field, right? Which is going
That's
to
what Chris
require.
is saying.
Yeah,
that
yeah.
It's not, you're not just fixing, maintaining,
Yeah.
essentially the 60 would be to fix what's already there, but capital when you're changing it, improving. it.
Sure.
So-
yeah, I mean.
Well, let's do that.
One option also is just, I mean, Mary can certainly create an account if you want to do a 29.13 and specifically mention Cambria to show that that funding is tied to that particular space. That's easily doable as well.
well, I thought that Jerry Lee was proposing we drop it into the general parks and open space.
Yeah, I
Because
don't
we don't
see-
know what the
Okay.
number's gonna be yet.
Right.
so-
Okay.
We're in a more amorphous stage at this point,
Okay,
but I don't, I'm not really wedded one way or the other.
Mhm.
I do understand the point of the operations of just doing a basic field renovation. versus-
And how much do we actually need for sidewalks? I mean, it
Well,
doesn't sound like we
we're gonna
need
take
any.
Apparently nothing's planned.
So why don't we move most of that money into this fund as well?
Yeah.
We were already talking about.
my
doing that.
understanding is you were
that's good.
taking it to zero is what it sounded
To
like.
zero
Yeah,
or
That's
to?
what I thought I
For the
heard.
side, for
The
the
sidewalks.
sidewalks.
The
not for
sidewalks.
roads.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just the
We'll leave the
sidewalks.
roads alone. Yeah, let's go to the
Yeah, leave the
sidewalks.
roads alone
Barb,
and move your sidewalk.
How much in this budget, this proposed budget, do we have actually for town hall?
If you add the $301,000 to what's there, it takes you up to basically $2 million.
Okay. So we might need another $500,000, which we don't have a source of those funds yet, right?
That's what I was wondering, like, is if we're figuring there's like 334 being added to this year's budget, most likelihood it's gonna be the same next year, and if we tighten our belts, then, or in that same range, if we tighten our belts a little bit on some other budgets, maybe we could get it to be higher, but I mean, I'm assuming like figure that most of that would go to that. And that I was also proposing like drop down streets and curbs from 250 down to kind of like just whatever that, emergency, 27, 28 range project might be, and then, move that kind of
Move
money
that
to
money
town
over,
hall in the
yeah.
short term, and then
Yeah.
after
We don't
town
get-
hall, after
right,
town
yeah.
hall is done, after the fiscal year 27 budget, then put those
Yeah.
330-ish double in there, you get back up to, 500 really quickly again.
Yeah, I'm just gonna feel compelled to remind you all that we've got $800,000 of work between 27 and 29, between curbs and gutters and streets. So,
Budgeted,
no,
No.
need,
In capital
need,
project.
Right,
need.
yeah, I really need to see those to know.
Yeah, I can
feel
get them to
comfortable
you.
that
I
it's a
just,
need.
yeah, I don't think
So-
there's much point in my sitting there rattling them off now, but I can send
No,
it to
but yeah, if
you.
you could send it to me.
All right,
Well,
all right,
so if we agreed to do that?
What?
To move, okay, so we have over 300,000 now,
What are we moving out of streets and curbs in? Is what I'm not hearing.
nothing,
Nothing,
Right.
okay.
but
So-
we're moving sidewalks, all the sidewalks.
That's what I thought I heard.
And the other
then
60,000 from
it-
operating budget.
Is everyone fine with that? Okay, that's what I-
Let me just,
Yeah, if the mayor wants to do it differently,
let me just interpose a question here. We're not doing any sidewalk projects in the foreseeable future. If we do very limited sidewalk work, certainly, grinding down places
Mhm.
where it's been heaved is operational, not capital. Um,
Typically, if you're doing work that extends the life of a capital asset, then that is typically can be capitalized.
Well,
You can also argue that paving a road isn't capital work, that it's maintenance
No.
work, but it's typically capitalized.
No.
Might have enough to get going with the parks, and it was, again, it was like the Cambridge thing, it was a totally speculative number, and I'm willing, if permission granted from this table, like, just talk to Jason and kind of see if it's a crazy number, or maybe it's too much. But we might have enough with the 60 plus, most of, or all of that 120
20.
plus, we were talking about reducing utilities, that I wonder if it might be doable to kind of shift all this funding, kind of earmark money for the field, and then still keep some in sidewalks, maybe just reduce it down to 10 or 20 in case of those things that you're.
well, I should throw
Well,
another
into-
monkey wrench into it and say that the archives committee would like to get some money to do some capital work. One is to put up a display, a video display in the Penn Place in the lobby, post office lobby, where we could display, it could be used to display town announcements, but mainly it was to display a video for archives, where we might, instead of doing a display case, you could do something similar, like famous people from Garrett Park, or little quiz questions or something like that. And it's something we had talked about way in the past about a communications committee.
It's like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
6, 7.
And
years
it
ago.
never got off the ground, but we're thinking that it would be something good. So that was one thing we wanted to do, and that was figured about 3,000. And the other thing was, if we can, we want to see if we could tear out the old bathroom that's down full of archive stuff, move the door.
is it down on the lower level?
It's on the lower level. And it's the last, it's got a big map chest in there and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. George has said, I've discussed, Sonia and I talked about that, Phil, and George and I talked about it. And I guess this was being bandied about when George first started about 5 years ago. His recommendation is actually not to do that because it's actually just to move the existing archives door
Right.
more into the hallway. So there's less structural work.
Okay.
Because part of the question is, where do you put the files while you're bamming things around?
Yeah.
So that was George's suggestion. I apologize. I think I scratched down a number he had given me, but it's on a Post-it note in my office. So, but he also thought that would be the less costly way to do it all the way around. So that is something George has looked at, and he went over the suggestion with Sonia.
Okay, well, and that would be
Yeah.
then, whatever that number turns out.
Yeah,
to be,
I'll have to pull that
we had
up.
Thought maybe 10K or something.
I think that sounds like what George, right in that range, is
Right.
what I recall.
So we would have 13K for that, and then, on the operations side, there was some money that we normally have anyway, but we wanted to increase our amount. And I don't know where the budget, you probably talked to somebody about this, the budget for operating, besides the archivist salary, there's other money. for
Yeah,
operating
she
archives.
gave me some handwritten notes. Pretty much what she told me is that it kind of levels out to the FY 2025 appropriation. I did bump up that number a little bit in what's before you tonight because Claire was always trying to juggle her full-time job as well as being in the archives, and sometimes that was difficult. Sonia is hitting her hours, but when she attends archives committee meetings, that would be additional compensation for her.
Right.
So I just kind of estimated it based on my conversation with her and bumped up the appropriation to account for those meetings that she attends.
Okay, and that would include, some of the rest of the stuff that she had on this budget.
Yes, she basically told me that it was even with last year. I mean, even with the current year, and then I basically just bumped it up to account for some of the committee meeting attendance.
Well, because we had actually looked at bumping it up even further based on the fact we wanted to republish the town book, the one scrapbook that Paul Edlund had done, the big 11 by 17 book.
Mhm.
We want to put money in for that, and then we want to put money in for historic outreach during the 250th anniversary next year.
That next year?
This is this year, isn't it? It's this year.
No, it's 2026.
I thought
26.
The US anniversary.
So
US
Ed,
anniversary.
Oh, the US.
let's organize this. 12.2 archives, 28,250, 26,250 is currently comprised of the archivists' pay. Anything else?
Is the archives paid?
There was the archivist salary, some professional development for Sonia, archival supplies, general office supplies. She had asked about some kind of table and chairs.
And you've got 26,250 in there for 2025.
She mentioned outreach and she basically,
2026.
she bumped up, there's individual line items, but she had bumped up on what she gave me. Outreach training, special events from 500 to 2,000, and there's a note, preparation for US 250th celebration 2026. There are some archives memberships and there is some software.
Okay.
All right, well, is
that is
the
archives related.
implication of Phil's remarks that we need to add to that line or a capital budget line funds for
Sounds like 15 to capital, right?
a monitor in the lobby and a relocated door?
Phil, where were they talking about the monitor? Because I also heard that the archives committee had interest in a wall display, and there aren't that many unbroken walls. I mean,
Yeah.
that don't have, do you know, can you shed some light on that?
So the monitor was actually, I think, going to be part of was the wall display, which was going to be
Okay,
right where Dave Almey's picture of Ben Place is.
okay. So those are kind of one and the same. I was thinking they were two different things.
No, I
from
believe it's
Misunderstood.
Be one and the same.
And
All
I'll-
right, and what would be the amount of that?
About 3K, we thought.
3K,
TV
and
like this, or-
Yeah.
the relocating the door frame.
I need to
was-
look at, I think it was, I'll look at what George gave me. I think it was roughly 10 to 15. I just need to
Yeah.
pull the note.
It shouldn't be more than 10.
That's what that's what we need to check.
What's that?
Okay, so
Just the electrical outlets and stuff.
that
Yes.
13,000 advance, does it need to go in operating or capital?
I would say if we're physically changing the office space, which it sounds like there's interest in that, I would say that's capital. I think if there's, like Kayla, I'm not sure, I think it may be more involved if we're doing kind of, an electronic display. George is on vacation. I can't talk to him until Monday to see just what the electrical part would
The
be.
electrical area looked at least. a
Well-
outlet right there.
Yeah,
I don't think we need to get quite that far down in the weeds. But the door frame sounds to me like it would be a capital expense that would go under 27.1.
yes,
Well,
that's
there's
right. That's where I
currently-
put it.
There's currently 15, and that 15 is earmarked for what?
I would have to go back and look. That might, I need to look, Chris, I'm not sure.
Okay,
They have something there every year, right? There's something to fix. Or I guess that fixing would be operations then.
Typically, if it's just a minor repair, it's operational.
Maybe that's the door.
No, I know it's not the door. I don't think we.
Could also just be the remains of all the work we just completed. Well, what the remainder was.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be that neat and even.
Yeah, it's-
I'll need to look it up, sorry.
oh. Is it possibly the, oh no, the painting of the shed was not capital, right?
It was,
27.3 other reasons.
yeah, it got removed.
So that $30,000 includes the shed. Yeah, I thought it hadn't happened yet.
No, that it's done.
It has happened.
Okay, so it's in this year's budget.
That'll come out of 27.3.
I think, I want to double check this, but I'm looking at some notes from last year's budget. It looks like that the interior painting of Penn Place initially was budgeted in 27.1 is what it looks like, but that later got moved, I think potentially to an ARPA project. I just need to follow the trail
Okay.
through.
Yeah, that's,
It seems like there's enough shiftable to make,
I can give
hold
it-
some money for Cambria and fix Penn Place up a little bit more for archives.
Stephen, are you thinking 200 or 250? Because that's obviously a pretty wide gap there in terms of,
Yeah. And is it? Again, I wonder if it's worth it, if I just talk to Jason and kind of see.
probably, yeah.
What he thinks a better ballpark I could be off by, rather than us relying on a number that could be
Yeah,
50K off.
they do a lot of work from
Yeah.
the county public schools.
Yeah, maybe what I could do is like send this group, just by email, like the diagram and the scope list of what I had in mind that I would talk to them about, and then 'cause I think eventually if we want to move forward with this, probably need to find a way in quick order to get it known around town.
Yeah.
It's guaranteed there's gonna be somebody against it. There's probably be a lot more people for it, but a lot more people that are neutral and don't care, but still have to do it. But I think to do it in quick order to be able to get it, where I'd love to see it like designed and, in time to do the construction once the pool shuts down and do it, yeah. Like, whatever day the pool shuts down, start the next day. So,
We have to put it out to bid, right?
at that price, yes.
Yeah.
That would be a big reason for that. That was one of your big concerns, Chris, right? Is the time it takes to do a bid. It could be the risk of. getting
yeah,
it
this
done
is
this
not
year.
going to get done until the fall of 27,
Yeah.
realistically speaking.
What's involved in what do we have to do for a bid? Like if, say we could figure out a design enough to bid by, what's now March.
From
If it
June.
could be done June by, say it's done, ready by mid-July, could you have it bid out and awarded and like, a month and a half or 2 months, really.
Usually for something, I mean, there's obviously the time involved in actually developing the bid specifications, depending on how much you want to expedite that. You know, we could, it obviously takes it from a staff cost to a contractual cost, but we could ask Clark Azar for some help in drafting the bid specs. Typically what Kayla and I do is we look for other people who've done, you know, the structure of the bid is not that difficult. It's really just the guts of it. So it's just having enough specificity from a technical requirement standpoint, which we probably would need Clark Azar's help with that.
They do it a lot, so I imagine they probably have a lot of things.
They
can
do,
put together and they do it
yeah.
for schools.
They do have tons of work for the schools. Yeah, I mean, typically, I think of Yendel and the demolition, for example, or even just the park design under which we hired Norton. The bids are typically out on the street for about, you know, at least 4 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks, especially if there's a site visit, you know, a mandatory pre-bid meeting.
Well, the other thing would be, when's the public outreach going to occur? In other words, when are we gonna spring this on our constituents and see what they have for input?
So I'm wondering, I'm just trying to work it backwards. I wonder if there could be like that, if it's 2 months, say, to hold, like, whole July and August to bid it out and award. If it takes Clark Azar to like May and June to put together the documents, I think it would leave April really to have that outreach.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not
April's
changing the
gonna
use.
take here in a minute. It's already.
Yeah, I know,
almost
but
April.
I know that I may be the only person that A, thinks this, but I'm also the person that has done it personally the most. That's a lot. We do a lot of outreach in the town, and we still get people all the time that say that they weren't aware of something. And we get a lot of
Well-
people that feel like if they just raise their hand and say they're against it, then that means that they have 400 votes that is against it. And we're not changing the use, so I
Well, at
suspect
least
that
we
it'll
should
be-
tell
just let-
Pasco what we're.
I want
Yeah.
Phil, I want Phil to enlarge on the notion of outreach. I believe you're in a position to make a decision tonight. It's such a constrained decision. So we're talking about outreach, about informing people, or outreach soliciting their opinion? Because if it's the latter, we're off and running.
Well, I would think that we.
I'm with you.
I would think that we need to solicit their opinion, because the issue is,
So what are the opinions going to be, pro and con, on renovating the ball field, providing a safer grass surface?
And keeping the use that we've always had. They like to keep everything the same.
We aren't dictating,
might be
the-
talking
we aren't
about-
dictating, we aren't dictating the uses. We're
Right.
providing a renovated surface.
well, it would be, I guess the way I would look at it is, if it's just a renovated service, then it shouldn't matter. If we're gonna expand it or make any other changes, then I think it would matter.
It's
I
a
agree.
cost trade-off, right? It's money you're spending that belongs to the
Well,
public.
it's-
But nonetheless, it seems like a good use. It doesn't stretch the current usage. It would seemingly be okay.
I mean.
But I'm not up for reelection, so.
If all we do is just renovate it, then I think we'd be fine, because it'd be like painting a wall. It doesn't really matter, you know? But if it's like something where, you know, we're gonna make it wider, we're gonna change the fences. I assume we're gonna tear down the backstop.
Yeah.
Oh, the backstop goes in any event. It's
Right.
falling apart.
Well,
Right.
part it's unsafe.
Yeah.
It's not
No,
really
I'm-
needed anyway. So.
Yeah, I'm not arguing. I'm just saying that if we were to change something else that would be significant, then I think there'd be some.
Yeah.
People should be told about it, because you don't want to get in a position where people go running around saying, hey, we never got a chance to opine on the issue.
I don't think anybody
That's
would
true.
do
Well,
it where you
but
just
what is,
do it.
what is the issue? Is it to renovate the ball
So
field,
I
or
think
to
renovation would be
solicit input on alternative or modified uses, or what?
It would be, if we're just gonna renovate it, then I don't see a big deal, because.
I think we should at least tell the Pasco people that we're doing it.
Right.
You should
oh, of
tell every
course.
resident in town.
Yeah,
They were
Put
thinking
it on the
about doing it.
listserv.
yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
they'll know that we have the bugle.
Well, that, and then I can
Right.
put together a diagram that could be sent out. I mean, it could be, unfortunately, I'm gonna miss the April meeting, but I was wondering if that could be the outreach, if everybody else wouldn't mind covering it, just if people have comments, like bring them to the April meeting, and then if there's thoughts about how to get the best bang out of the buck for kind of enhancing the uses that are already there, those kind of things could be infused in May and June. I think we fall in the trap a lot of time of just kind of spending forever, like debating whether to do something and nothing gets
Okay.
done.
Back to the decision we need to make tonight. How much
Yes.
money do you want to allocate as a placeholder? And where does it come from and what line does it get put in?
We already, didn't we discuss that? The 90,
Where did we come down on that? Is this a capital
The
project?
60 coming from operations. Jerry Lee, I think you were suggesting leave the 32 for planning for the other part, right? So that wouldn't be in it.
Some
120
amount.
Yeah, the one, that's probably enough. If you're only doing that, to do a concept, I think for the other end, I think that should be enough.
and then the sidewalks money, right?
Yeah, that's
26.2.
Okay,
And then-
That's 251,
and
Yeah.
the sidewalk money.
Did
No,
we
it's
identify
121.
adequate amounts for the archives?
Yes.
From
Okay.
the,
I believe so, yes.
I'm trying to add it together. We got 121 plus 60 plus 50 out of utilities.
So we are taking utilities?
Some,
Well,
Some of it.
we can only take about 50 max. There's no way to do. Already have allocated some of the money for the Waverly streetlights.
yeah, so not zeroing it out. But that adds up, those three things add up to 231 minus, was it 13 for the archives? That's
Yeah.
218.
We need to double check those
We're
numbers.
talking
but we'll-
about-
So we're gonna leave the street number alone, money that we have in streets.
for now.
Yeah.
and we're talking about moving this to
29.1, 29.1.
capital 29.1.2.
1.2 dash 2. Yeah, other
Okay.
public spaces.
And do we reduce the operating budget? 13.5 by 60, which was the placeholder figure I had in there,
That's what I'm hearing.
and move it to the capital because we consider this project a capital expense.
That's what I'm hearing, yes.
Okay,
Yep.
So the 50,000 from utilities, is that what the
Yes.
Yeah,
consensus of the
60
group
from
is?
operations, 121 from sidewalks, that's 231-ish.
110 and
Minus 13-ish for the archives, or 13 for archives, that leaves 218, which that's probably fine for a placeholder for now until I can talk to Clark Azar.
Okay.
Hopefully he thinks it's overkill at 218.
Mhm.
So,
I mean, and also we're putting nothing towards, that would mean we're putting nothing right now as earmarked towards Penn Place. Or I'm sorry, Town Hall.
Nothing additional
Nothing
besides
additional.
the already
Because there is
2 million.
300,000.
About 2
transfer.
million in there.
and 331
It's not even-
transfer for this year.
It's not even necessary,
Or
but if I
no.
could ask Bill
Yes.
Barr to cover our ears, I would suggest next year, like move the streets money and, take as much needed from the next year's carryover to get town hall done and then backfill streets. But
Well, that
I
just,
don't need to worry about it.
We'll burn that
I don't
bridge.
think,
when it
yeah,
comes
the
Yeah, we're
time-
not gonna spend that money until like literally 2 years from now.
well, the timing, just,
Construction.
we're already in the design development phase, and I'm just referring back to the email exchange I had with Greg Wiedemann. That's scheduled to go through September of 2025 is what he indicated, with construction documents would be October 2025 to April 2026. So you've got sufficient funding to keep moving the design.
Yeah, actually, I forgot. Yeah,
Right,
just
and
really next summer. it would
We
be-
will get the
Yeah.
backfill from
Correct.
the Parks grant too.
Correct.
We're gonna
Yes.
reallocate within
That's good back.
capital.
Yeah, there's $800,000 in grants. that we don't
500,
have,
it's actually 550.
Plus 300, I thought, for Yandell.
It's
250.
250 for Yandell and 300 for Town Hall.
I think Todd's having
So
so
it's
much
500
fun. He really should
yeah.
be running.
So that
Would you
money
like me to
is just
start a
not
petition?
even in there.
Hey, that's right. Last 2 days.
okay. We sort of leapt right to the capital budget, I think. Did we have discussion of the, either the revenues or other than our incidental discussion of operations as it affected the capital changes?
Just very briefly, Barb, And maybe you explained this and I missed it somehow, your projection for prior year carryover is a lot lower. Is that because you've already reallocated so many things that it's less likely to have the extra?
It's basically, in a nutshell, I looked at where I thought income taxes were going to come in this year, which was about $20,000 higher. There's usually with property taxes, just people making prior year payments, so a little bit from that. On the operational side, I think there's some unknowns, which I had mentioned. One is Oliver has left. We are in the process of recruiting and we don't really know what type of insurance that person is going to elect. And it can be, we budgeted for Oliver. I mean, Oliver had elected individual coverage in the cheapest plan that there is. So until we know who we're hiring and what they elect, I'm uncomfortable just assuming that there's going to be a lot of savings in personnel. Professional fees, I think you all are aware, there's an issue that we're working on, so I'll know a little bit more, I think, as we get a little further. We've got a couple weeks to go, but that will bring in all the March bills for professional fees. And then the other big area of spending is basically tree related. I would be surprised candidly if we expended every dollar that we budgeted this year. I have a removal list from Phil Normandy that I sent over to Empire for pricing on Sunday. I do not have a pruning list for pricing, so I'm kind of shooting blind on how much of that. So I took the most conservative posture, which is to assume that we spend the full appropriation on professional fees, we spend the full appropriation on personnel, and we spend the full appropriation on the tree related work, just because it's too little information right now.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
Once
The other
we
thing-
remove the 60,000 from the trees, parks and grounds operating.
Yeah.
That brings it down to 120. Another large item, 123 for IT operations.
Yes,
Yeah.
Is that all operational? No.
it is.
Purchase?
There's very little in IT these days that is actually just the nature of the beast. That is actually, I'm just pulling out some notes for myself. None of that's, it's all operational. So there's some scheduled equipment replacement. There's licenses that we need to have specifically for Microsoft 365. There are the normal things we have, like our help desk, kind of managed security, moving to Azure, our firewall. There is some money built into that account. We do not yet have the outcome of the ISM assessment that you all, third-party security assessment, comparing us to NIST standards. Our IT consultant and I spent about 11 quality hours on the phone with ISM. And we do not have their report, but there were certainly some things that came up during that conversation that they will probably recommend funding. And then we have just our, SurveyMonkey subscription, Adobe, or website hosting, things of that nature.
No, I see that right now, year-to-date expenses for 25 are only about 41,000.
I had a meeting with our IT consultant to go over the budget. IT is not one of those things. I mean, there are some items such as our Microsoft licenses and things, our help desk costs that are, regular throughout the year. There are other things that are not, and that's what we're hitting now. So I do think most of that will likely be, basically indicated most of that would likely be spent.
So in the next couple of months, we're gonna see a big chunk taken.
Yes.
That part I had a similar question to Phil. It sounds like that part that was in the FY25 amended will finally get, that's kind of being carried forward, but would get spent.
Yeah, our IT consultant has been also dealing with some personal family circumstances that slowed things down a little bit. So yeah, that work is kind of moving at a very, very quick pace now.
The professional fees, 11.4, you mentioned that is being nailed down more
Well,
specifically, but it's
there
a
will
large
likely,
increase.
there will it's actually budget to budget. It's actually a slight decrease.
Decrease, yeah.
142 to 140.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Roughly 143.
Oh, okay, okay.
I've wondered about that one philosophically. I guess, is there a way to ongoing with the budget? Is there a way to separate like some of the major ones, like legal from engineering? And I don't know whether the ones show up regularly.
I got it.
Audit
I
question.
got it.
Yeah, the
Audit's kind of like the smaller, regular one. but-
there was, here, I can send that to you. Just anticipating some questions.
We had a nightmare, I was gonna ask that.
No, actually, I didn't think it would be you. I did think it would be somebody. So included in your agenda packet materials for the February meeting, I had been asked, I think it was by Jerry Lee, to provide some historical data. What I just passed out is essentially the same information. Everything except the right column was part of your February packet. So this kind of gives you an idea of by category, how the professional fees break down. We do have an RFP out on the street for audit services. So that's a guesstimate on my part because I don't know who's going to bid and what those bids will look like.
It seems like a lot for what it is, but I guess we can't really avoid it, right? It's probably just the
It's-
fee is what it
It's
is.
a requirement by law.
Yeah,
Yeah, both in the town charter
It's
as
kinda
well as by
stuck.
state law.
it seems like almost like they could rubber stamp what they've said before.
They should not be rubber stamping anything if they're
Anything.
doing their job.
Should
If we want to be competitive for grants, we need to meet our audit requirements.
No, I'm not saying not to do it, but it just
No,
feels like for
that's actually,
what they do, it's a lot of money.
that's actually fairly modest in my experience.
Yeah.
I mean, the town structurally, from a financial standpoint, is fairly simple. We don't have enterprise funds, we don't have utilities and things like that
Yeah.
that complicate it. So we'll see how the bids come in.
Barb, what's the money in for 11.3 elected and appointed officials?
That is,
19 grand.
yeah,
Ocean City slush money.
Ocean
You
City.
got
it's
it.
not a slush fund.
Bill's Buffalo
It,
Wings.
it covers a number of things, so I have budgeted, and if you all want me to take this number down, I can. It assumes 4 attendees at the MML Summer Conference. As you might recall, when you adopted the travel policy last October, it's a lot easier if it's not budgeted and someone wants to attend, then they have to bring it forward and everything else. If it's budgeted, then we just register them. We're assuming 1 attendee at the mayor's conference. There's some professional development for staff, also included in 11.3. Not quite sure why it's here, but it's where it's been long before I started, was everything that is election related.
Okay.
Membership fees? for-
Membership fees end up in 11.6, that is external organizations. So that's our,
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's MML, I guess, right?
it's MML, it's our chapter membership, it's professional memberships for Kayla and myself. And then the town has historically just budgeted some subscriptions there. I mean, very minimal, like Amazon and Sam's Club, but most of it's going to be memberships, whether organizationally or, for both the elected officials as well as for Kayla and myself.
Question on revenues. The gifts to sanitation crew
That
got
is,
zeroed out.
basically, we don't budget for, these are donations that are made by residents.
Oh.
And basically, it initially comes in, if you think about the reserve summary that's shown in, as part of the monthly financial report, it comes in as kind of a restricted revenue because people are donating for a specific purpose, and
I
then it's paid out.
Okay,
So we don't budget for it because we never
right.
know what people are going
It's
to
a
donate.
holiday gift kind
That's
of thing.
everything in 16.0, those are all donation items.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
On the legal fees, I know 25 and 26 are up for
Yeah.
a reason, but
Mhm.
I'm wondering, is there a way it could be tracked for like where it was trending in 23, 24, if we can't get back to kind of like where it was around 21, 2019? I think even my first 2 years on council, I think they were even less than it shows on here for 2020.
Yeah, part of what's been happening, obviously, there's a specialized counsel that you all are aware of. We have also, Ron Bolt was representing a number of municipalities, including Garrett Park, in terms of the technical amendment to state law. We paid a share of that.
Okay.
That expense, he allocated it between his various clients. As you also know, we've been doing a considerable amount of work with the code.
They're a little unusual.
Yeah, hopefully the code will be, there's still some areas that we need to address,
Alright.
but we've made progress.
Barb, can you explain the 6.0 from reserves? It seems like it bounces around a huge amount. So it was 167, then it was 2,000, so and then it's 0. It's at the bottom of the, right before total revenue.
Oh, 6.0.
Yeah, I'd have to go back, Lisa, and look at what happened in FY 2023.
Something.
Yeah, and 24. Well, there was one year where, if you remember, I can't remember exactly when, it was during my tenure, otherwise I wouldn't know about it, but where we kind of went through the reserves and we like lessened the amount that was held for vacation leave payouts when an employee departs.
Right.
There were some of that happened. I believe that was in 24. I need to go back and look. The small dollar amounts, the 2,230 and the 3,935, that's the donations that were made for the sanitation crews.
But one year it was 160, one year it was 90,000, then it was 167,000.
Yeah, the
Then it was
167.
2,000, and then it went to 0.
The 167, I'm confident, Lisa, includes some of the right sizing we did of the reserve accounts, such as there was 50-some thousand dollars because we had set aside way more money than we would ever need for employee vacation leave payouts. So I do remember that number specifically, and I think that was in 24.
Okay.
Where is our reserve show up on here?
Right
Oh, it's
here.
down on,
It's
down the bottom.
6.0 right before total revenue.
No, but then the actual reserve held is down here, right? So it's total operating reserve or expenses with reserve, right? Is it down here in 21?
Yeah, so I was looking, this is the FY 2024 budget amendment 2. $57,713 was taken from reserves, which was the employee leave reserve I mentioned. There was also just a technical correction that was needed in the budget to recognize what we actually got, received in restricted revenue. And that amount was a deduction from reserves of $56,086. So it came to a total of $113,799. And that was in FY 2024. I'd have to do a little bit more digging to see what else was in there, but that's a good chunk of the 167 you asked about, Lisa.
Okay, thank you.
You're holding an operating reserve every year, right? Like it's a
The operating
certain
reserve,
untouchable.
yes. That's pretty common. It's normally a percentage of your expenses that you set aside.
Okay, but I'm wondering, where is that shown? Is that down in 21 or is
That is on the reserve summary. I can bring that up. So that's in the reserve summary that you all,
$250,000.
yeah.
21.1.
So it kind of hovers in that
Yeah.
range all the time.
Yeah, it's, hold on 1 second.
It's the exact amount, it's not literal, just.
No,
curious
it's
if it
easy enough
was on
to
the print.
bring up.
Well-
I'll just bring it up as part of my financial report.
Actually, to that end, do we need to think about putting more money into it since obviously prices, costs have gone up, or income has gone up, et cetera, et cetera? Do we need to think about having to put some more money into that?
I think it's something to watch. I don't know that you have to. So here's the reserve summary as of the end of February. We had 250,000 in an operating reserve, 40,000 in an employee leave reserve. We had just a little over $11,000. That was that amount has gone up, but that was for tenant security deposits for Penn Place. There was a small residual amount of roughly 2,000 that for the archives that was reserved for the Richterville house tour proceeds. That's been around for a while. We had $330 for a bench. The Arboretum, I think, had a donation. And then the bulk of what is reserved is these restricted funds for highway user revenue. As of the end of February, we had 170,528. And the Verizon Capital PEG funds was just under 22,000.
Those Verizon funds, can we use them here for
Yes.
AV equipment?
Yes, that's why we started setting them aside. So it can be used for this space, and that's kind of what it was envisioned. The uses are quite limited.
Right. that's
Yeah,
what I
so we
thought.
kind of just set it aside and assumed it would be used somewhat towards improvements to town hall.
So, yeah, I was gonna say, toss that in the town
Yeah.
hall budget. So.
All right, any further questions or discussion?
Well, did we agree to move the monies around?
Yeah,
That's what I
Yeah.
heard.
we
Oh,
need,
I just wanted to make
Yes.
sure.
Yeah.
we
Seemed
need
like
to,
we had consensus.
I think,
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I,
I'd like to reiterate, I'm
understanding.
very appreciative of your patience with me on that, because
in the ordinary course of
a good one.
events,
So 2026 income and expenses net out to zero. Is that what I'm looking at?
yes, whatever basically revenues are over expenses, the balance of that, that's not restricted gets moved to capital.
Okay,
And that's part of the exercise you go through, as you did tonight, is figuring out where those funds go.
right.
Just a question. Is it possible for a municipality to run a deficit?
no.
No,
Impossible.
Or the state.
Good. Good news.
yeah, I
Just
mean,
wondering.
there
Other
are-
than a controlled debt, like a bond.
well, I
issue.
mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
certainly, there have been local governments that go into receivership because they're in such bad
Oh.
financial shape, and Pennsylvania was one of those. Kayla's neck of the woods a number of years ago. I know, exactly. And they're not alone.
did the chicken suffer?
When in receivership, does that mean that the state takes over the management?
Someone takes control,
Yeah.
yes.
The state will
Goodness
generally
gracious.
appoint
Yeah, someone to act
and
as-
Harrisburg is a really great and terrible example of how long it can take to get out of receivership.
Yeah,
Altoona, Pennsylvania is another high profile receivership and only recently had it.
We're
yeah.
so glad you moved.
It's gotta be tough, all those like.
So,
those belt cases to-
and so staff has sufficient
Mhm, yes,
information
yes, we
from
do.
us. I would like to explore with you, not tonight,
Mhm.
but the possibility of circulating the draft for introduction somewhat in advance of our usual Friday before the meeting.
Sure, and one of.
We can discuss. it.
Well, no, I was just going to mention that, you are required to have a public hearing for the budget, and that has a very specific advance notification requirement, which I believe is 5 days. So I can just go ahead and start pulling things together. I don't know, Chris, if you want to do the public hearing at the April meeting or the May meeting. Either way is fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think. Okay, anything further? All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you all.